I encountered quite a lot of complications in my pregnancy. Firstly, I developed hyperemesis, HG, really early on. From about 6 weeks, I was being sick 20, 30 times a day. And then sort of halfway through my pregnancy, I developed a condition called obstetric cholestasis. It's a liver condition which increases your bile acid levels in your blood. There's a high risk of stillbirth and hemorrhaging.
This was our second pregnancy. Definitely what I realised is that every single pregnancy is completely different from one another.
With my first baby, we had him in hospital. My friend locally had a home birth, so I met the team, and as soon as I met that first midwife, I knew that this was the right thing to do for us. So we had to go and see the consultant who advised against a home birth. We researched a lot, as much as we could, about obstetric cholestasis, and we found out that if your bile acid levels are under 40, mine were 14, but if they're under 40, there's actually no evidence of increased risk of stillbirth or hemorrhaging. So we were very happy, and so were my home birth midwives, to support us in the decision to stay at home. And we felt that the increased risk surrounding induction was actually more dangerous. The consultant disagreed with us. So as soon as I hit 37 weeks, everybody was, every single time, you need to stay and be induced, you need to stay and be induced. And my bile acid levels were about 20, but they wouldn't let me leave until I signed a statement that basically said, I understand what you're saying to me, and I agree and happy that I'm putting my baby's life at risk by declining induction. And it was just awful. I felt like a naughty schoolgirl, you know, writing, saying that I'm willingly putting my baby's life at risk, which I did not believe at all. It was just awful. And my midwife that was with me at the time, she was really upset about it too, and she complained to her superior. And I eventually got a written letter of apology from the hospital. So the night before I went into labour, I had my blood tests done, and my bile acid levels had gone up to 39, which was one under our induction level. So we agreed over the phone with my home birth midwife to go into hospital and be induced the next day unless I went into labour that night. The stars aligned and I went into labour at about midnight. I got into the pool at about 6. He was born at 8 a.m. and it was so relaxed, and after he was born I got to sit and hold him in the pool for about 20 minutes till I started falling asleep. It was better than I could ever have imagined. Absolutely wonderful. After I had Theo, I just assumed that as soon as the baby was out, I'd be healthy. And I was sort of healthy for about a day, I guess, when Theo was about 3 days old. And then I started to get severe pain when I was breastfeeding him. It led to acute mastitis. I ended up in hospital. He was, I think, 7 days old when I was shivering all through the night, and Tim rang the home birth midwives and explained my symptoms. They said, you need to go to triage. They sent me home saying I've got a migraine. The team leader of the home birth team called me and said, where are you? I've been looking for you on the ward. I said, well, they sent me home. I just had a migraine. And she said, well, I've just looked at your blood test results and your inflammatory markers are really high. You've got an infection. Did they give you antibiotics? And I said, no. She said, you need to either go back to triage or go to the GP quickly. Got to the GP and she just took one look at me. My breast was now purple. And she said, why have they sent you home? You need to immediately go to the hospital right now. She was considering calling me an ambulance. I had all the signs of sepsis. Within an hour, I had 3 different types of antibiotics, you know, going in through IV. I still really don't know why they sent me home the day before. I'd hold Theo against my boob because everyone says you have to feed through mastitis, you have to feed through the pain, it helps. And I've had mastitis before with Max, but never this bad. And I would bite on my arm whilst I was feeding him to stop from screaming. And it got to the point where every time Theo stirred and made a noise, I'd start having a panic attack because I knew I had to feed him, and it just hurt so much. It shouldn't be like that. And everyone just kept saying to me, you've got to keep going, you've got to keep going. The only person who didn't say that was my husband, who's like, let's get a bottle, let's feed him some formula.
One of the biggest things that surprised me when I became a new dad was the pressure on mums to breastfeed. A healthy baby must also include a mother that is healthy, must include parents who are in the right mental state to look after the children, and also a baby that's actually feeding. Yeah, fine, breast is best, but in my view, feeding a baby is the most important thing, and the pressure is absolutely unbelievable. My
home birth midwife Penny came round and I just had a breakdown. I couldn't stop crying. I felt like I'd massively failed. And she said, stop. You need to stop. It was a really hard decision. And I felt so guilty for such a long time. But I had to stop because I couldn't. I was starting to resent my son because he was hungry. I was in so much pain. And we just started bottle feeding him and I stopped breastfeeding. Theo took to the bottle fine. He didn't know any different, you know. Tim loved it because he got to feed his baby, you know. Even when I went back to the hospital to get the all clear, it was probably about 3 weeks after I'd stopped. And he said to me, right, you're all clear, there's no abscess, you can start feeding again now. I felt like a massive failure. So I'm just a huge failure, they're better off without me. Why am I even here? Would anybody notice if I just left and drove my car into a, you know, building or a bridge or a river or something? One of my midwives says, I would really like to refer you to the perinatal mental health team. I think that you could do with some help. And I went to see a psychologist. I think it was about 3 or 4 sessions in when I said to her, I don't have postnatal depression, do I? Like, you know, she said, yeah, I think you do. And I just thought, oh, I didn't want that label. I didn't want to be that person. Then I realised it was nothing that I'd done, and actually to acknowledge it and accept it was part of getting better. It was like a massive relief. I felt half better already just by admitting it. You should talk about it, try and get some help because it will only get worse, and then it's harder. The longer you leave it, the harder it is to talk about it and to get some help.
It's awful seeing the person that you love going through that sort of pain, both physically and mentally as well. And depression and mental challenges throughout pregnancy is just as much of an issue as postnatal challenges as well. So I do think that needs to be recognised. I do think that there does need to be more support out there for both the mums and the dads.
There's a lot of talk nowadays, there's more talk anyway about postnatal depression, but nobody ever talks about prenatal depression, and I think that's actually where my problem started. Everyone cares about the baby, and of course the baby is the most important, you know, thing ever, but it's about a mum too, you know. Everyone wants to hold the baby. Who holds the mum?